Hi, I'm Anderson Brown. I'm going to continue on today with the slideshow at the usual brisk pace, so as not to take too much of your time. I did want to mention at the beginning, though, that this is kind of a big one for me because I'm doing Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Not only is this the fourth and culminating video on my series of four texts by Aristotle, but I also think that Nicomachean Ethics, a later work, is really a sort of summary, a general statement of a lot that's really basic about Aristotle's philosophy. So I do want to tag that at the beginning, that I think this is one that is pretty basic and good to know about. I really like this philosophy of Aristotle's, I must say. Of course, I've been at this for a long time, and so my feelings have changed and evolved over all the years. What I would say about that right now is, coming into ancient Greek philosophy, I was always quite dazzled right from the beginning, because from the undergraduate years, really, by the systemicity of Plato, about this sort of his vision. Aristotle's texts are just a bit less accessible than the dialogues of Plato, and I sort of thought that inaccessibility was reflected also too in a more of a variegated literature of this person's philosophy. But now, nowadays, having been around Aristotle a lot longer, no, he's very, very systematic, and I think in a very good way. I think he's a naturalist, not a Cartesian dualist. I think he's got really just a lot to recommend. A naturalist who's not a reductive materialist. So I'll go away from the isms now and get to it. Again, you can watch any of the videos by themselves. They're all freestanding, but they also are organized roughly from beginning to end. That is, the physics is earlier, de anima is in the middle, and then the poetics and the Nicomachean Ethics from a later period. The fifth one that I would do, hopefully will do at some point, is the politics. But also, I think they flow in a way where you sort of add on what one text says, kind of flows pretty well onto what was established before. First of all, the second bullet point, Aristotle's physics describe. I'll go quickly here. Describes nature in terms of, first of all, substance. He says primary being is substance. What is substance? It's a unity of form and matter. So Aristotle doesn't want it to be that there are two kinds of beings and their interaction mysterious, and the formal kind of being not something that can be seen by human beings at all. That is, he has these sort of empirical scientific objections to Plato's metaphysics, but at the same time, Aristotle is real in a very sophisticated level opposed to the reductive materialism of people like Democritus of his time. And so that's something that I think that sort of middle way that he's steering there metaphysically between Plato and Democritus really informs all of Aristotle's philosophy. Is crucial to understand. Third bullet point about de anima, the Latin title, we use that traditionally on his theory of mind, really the metaphysics of mind. And what we have here is a complete absence of any kind of Cartesian dualism. And in fact, Plato has form-matter dualism, which Plato thinks relates to the metaphysics of mind. But Aristotle rejects both the form-matter dualism of Plato and mind-matter substance dualism of Descartes. He doesn't have any of that. He thinks that when we're looking at human beings in general, describing them either physically or what we would call psychologically in terms of their behavior, in terms of what they say, we are really describing an organism that's working through a biological process, which is the process of its living its life. And finally, again, the last bullet point on the slide about the poetics, I thought to include it because I think understanding the poetics, again, helps to understand the Nicomachean Ethics. In the poetics, catharsis is, notice, not a pleasing release, not a letting go of tension, but rather the productive stimulation of our potential in exactly the same way that real life stimulates our potentials. And it sort of works like the immune system works. You get sort of the challenge, and then it's in your nature to come up with a response. But that is more fulfillment and development for you. And that is what is pleasing, for example, about the theater. So, so this is an example. We're going to talk about this a lot today of eudaimonia, the pleasure of virtuous activity. So let's go on. What is the Nicomachean Ethics? Is it just a book of ethical philosophy? It's from his later period. As I'm sure you've heard, Nicomachus may have been his son. It was certainly someone he was close to, and he dedicated the book to them. Perhaps if it was Nicomachus, his son, he also meant for it to provide kind of homely wisdom. But it is a kind of summing up of a systematic thought in any event, and that's really what it is. The word, second bullet point here, the word ethics in the title might be somewhat misleading. I think it's misleading. There are discussions of philosophy of science. There are discussions of metaphysics, psychology, theory of human nature, and value theory per se as such, and not just ethical theory. In fact, as I say, his boundaries aren't the same as ours. His definitions, his technical definitions tend to be broader. For example, we talked earlier about his notion of what a cause is, his notion of what an explanation is. These are really wider terms encompassing more things than the narrower meanings that we attach to those words. Last bullet point, the Nicomachean Ethics, a theory of human good, what the good life is for humans, in the context of a more general theory of value. He doesn't think humans are exceptions. He's not a Cartesian dualist. He's not any kind of dualist. He's an organismic theorist. He sees human beings as part of nature. And that larger value theory is a product of a teleological view of nature. What is a teleological view of nature? That the answer to the what is it question, the question, what is this thing? The answer is in functional terms. It is something that does this. It is something that functions for this, not the physical description. The same function can be instantiated in lots of different physical objects or systems that have various different kinds of particular physical properties. The answer to the what is it? What is a heart? A heart is a pump. You can do all the physical describing that you want, but until you know that it's a pump, you won't know the answer to the what is it question. And the entire universe consists of goal-directed process. The entire universe is movement. Aristotle is giving a philosophy of movement, change as different kinds of movement. And so we will get to some of these more cosmic questions that people raise at the end of Nicomachean Ethics and the physics typically. Form, action, and virtue. So in Aristotle's physics, substance is the unity of form and matter. And so notice this, form for him, I just said, what is this thing doing? That's the answer to the what is this thing question. The what is it question, the defining question, is answered with the functional explanation, the thing that it does. And so the notion is, and this is, notice he's not completely unrelatable to Plato in any way. Form is the active element. Form is, in fact, a kind of motion. You've got the matter, which without motion would just be inert. And then you've got the motion, the change. And that is precisely and identically what he means when he says form. In fact, form just is the motion of change, all of which, that is all the change happening in the cosmos, is purposeful. And that's the non-reductive materialism. The material description doesn't tell you about the purpose, about the function. So non-reductive materialism. Materialism, everything is a material thing of some kind or other. That is the only thing that exists is substance, primary being the unity of form and matter. Okay, but non-reductive materialism, it's the formal functional description, which is the explanatory description, the description you want to understand what a thing is. So on that first bullet point still there, virtue is not reflected, right? In Cartesian dualism, you've got some sort of disembodied being that's kind of in the body, but not of it. And when the body does good things or does bad things, it's because it's under the command of the soul. But there isn't anything like that here. Human virtue itself is defined here as identical with virtuous human activity. Again, the only source of value in the universe, according to Aristotle, is movement and activity. To describe a person as possessing this or that virtue is a description of their behavior and its aims. Okay, so virtues are dispositions to behave, they're behavioral traits. What we call physical virtues, the second bullet point, versus these other kinds of virtues, in as much as they're biological traits, beauty, strength, are also features of this process. In other words, in fact, there's no metaphysical difference here at all. The last line on the second bullet point, that is, a human being might be beautiful, a human being might be wise, and these are both, you call it a physical description versus a behavioral description, but metaphysically, Aristotle doesn't see those things as two different things. Remember, he thinks that it's the movement of the matter, that is what the form is, and that is what the definition is of the virtue then. And the human growing up into a beautiful person physically is every bit as much as this sort of unfolding teleological movement as the human growing up to be a wise person or a prudent person. It's again, metaphysically, no difference there at all. Virtue, last bullet point, as Aristotle conceives it, could only be a kind of movement. Okay, this is just important, including the contemplation that Aristotle describes as the highest good. I do want to address that because that's a puzzle, so that's fun. So again, virtuous activity. Let's look at two key words and concepts that we find in the Nicomachean Ethics. Eudaimonia, happiness, usually translated as happiness or happiness for humans. Like Plato, Aristotle rejects the idea that sensual pleasure is the source of value. He rejects hedonism. The ethical theory that the only thing that's good for us is sensual pleasure, physical pleasure. Rather, he says, eudaimonia is the pleasure experienced in the fulfillment of our potential. He says that's really true pleasure. And therefore, we talk about that a lot in the Poetics. Therefore, it's necessarily a feature of an active process. There's no unmoving pleasure. There's no sort of sitting there pleasure, he thinks. When we feel good, it's because there's a process happening. So it can only be something that's embodied in and understood in the context of movement. Arete, often translated as excellent, root of the word aristocrat, and personal excellence. But as with eudaimonia, arete is a feature of activity. In that parenthesis there, in the second bullet point, unmoving matter, qua matter, as such, has no virtue. Okay, that's the theory. Virtue is a feature of teleological movement, goal-directed, purposeful movement, and that is what form just is. Virtuous activity is a demonstration of knowledge of how to do things. So phronesis is another concept that I could have put on a slide, one of the next ones. This getting together of practical activity with understanding. In the absence of any detached non-physical mind, there's nothing else that could embody virtue other than purposeful activity. Plato's impressed that when we're doing mathematics, it seems like the thinking is moving, and that's really interesting. But again, for Aristotle, this is all going to be purposeful activity of organisms. So it's a taxonomy of virtues. First bullet point, he does get into both the virtues and what are called the vices. I don't use that word too prominently here. I guess that's what you would use. But really, you've got the virtues, and then you've got the two bipolarities, the extremes of the virtues. And he gets into it enough that he can analyze that further, and you can get with Aristotle into talking about virtues for which we really don't have any words. So again, a very fine-grained work here by Aristotle, very interesting that way. Second bullet point, his approach to studying virtues is operational. He thinks that virtues are observable dispositions to behave. And he analyzes these as features of functional biological processes. When he sees that there's a disposition to behave, a particular type of disposition to behave, he thinks what he's looking at is what's essentially a biological process, just when he sees the nice skin or whatever it is. This and his method of questioning the meanings and uses of words, for example, looking for fallacies of equivocation, multiplication or the word division or whatever, are affinities he has with modern empiricism. He does have deep affinities with modern empiricists like David Hume and Ludwig Wittgenstein, as other prominent philosophers of the 20th century have pointed out about him. Last bullet point on the slide, Aristotle's ethics is often characterized as the golden mean, find the center. It's important to understand what the two extremes that Aristotle is steering between. It's not just obvious what that would be. That sort of needs to be set up. Aristotle, and I think this is a really interesting thing about the Nicomachean Ethics. Aristotle opposes Plato's dualism and reductive materialism of Democritus. He's looking for that middle way. So when he points out that virtues have means, that virtues are seeking a middle way, that is obviously influenced by his larger conceptual framework, but that bears more scrutiny. That virtues have means is plain to see. Part of the issue here is what are virtues, because virtues aren't emotional states. They're not particular kinds of thoughts. So what are they? They're behavioral dispositions, I think. But he doesn't really, I don't think, have to prove that it's a mean. I'm going to talk about why that is in the next slide as well. But here you see a very nice job done by someone here, giving us what you would call the virtue, and then what you call the two extremes. Again, I want to say that there's a good deal of systematicity with Aristotle's larger thinking and what he thinks the two extremes are. But I don't think he needs to prove that virtues have means, and I'm going to explain. I think that's plain to see, and I think I can explain why that is right now. Because virtues are defined functionally like organs. You've got a heart that pumps the blood. You've got courage that helps you face adversity. No virtue is an end in itself, although virtuous activity, eudaimonia, is happiness for organisms. But just as no organ is an end in itself, the organ is explained by its role in the larger body. Again, that's the non-reductive materialism. It's the larger organism explains the organism, not the other way around. And that goes for the virtues as well. The function that the activity performs for the larger organism, it's just what defines it as a virtue. The what is it is it's the thing that helps the organism this way. Courage, for example, is part of the form of a human being. It's part of what makes a human like an organ. Humans have hearts, humans have courage. Some have good ones, some have bad ones. Its function is to sustain purposeful behavior in the face of risk. And that function, notice, just is the definition. Again, we're using, what is this thing that you're calling the heart? Well, it's a pump. And that's also then the definition of the thing. Last bullet point, too much courage is rashness, a failure to adapt to circumstantial reality. Maybe that's otherworldly. See, I'm trying to see how the more basic metaphysics fits with the ethical theory. Not enough is cowardice, a failure to challenge adverse circumstances, maybe like that, right? But in any event, this bipolarity, last sentence on the slide, this bipolarity is inherent to functional explanation. Muscles can be strong or weak. What do we mean strong or weak? Where does that come from? It comes from the function. I mean, we wouldn't notice anything about the muscles if there wasn't something that they did. They either did it well, perhaps too well, or not well enough. And why is that? Precisely because they are defined by their functions, but virtues are like that too. And therefore virtues also will fall out into this continuum of the two extremes that are dysfunctional. So now I want to talk about contemplation. He says, contemplation is the highest good. The word is theoria, translated as contemplation. But remember, no such thing as passive activity for Aristotle, and certainly contemplation, again, as Plato noticed, contemplation, after all, is thought moving. There's something inherently emotion-like about it. Contemplation is the pursuit of understanding, which is an activity, a functional activity. What are we trying to get? Understanding. So the function of theory is achieving general or system-wide or holistic understanding of the web of teleological being. That sounds really complicated. But remember that sort of image of the little village with the farmland around it? I mean, you understand the connection between the changes of the seasons and the rains and the different kinds of seeds that you're planting at different times. And you need the horses to do that. So you need to keep the horses shod. So you need someone who can heat up the iron. and so on and so on. And this, I think, is also something that you notice in ancient Chinese social theory when you're looking at people like Mencius or Confucius or the art of war. That you just someone has to understand the larger sort of holistic picture, and of course that's going to be something that involves a lot of what we usually think of like human rationality. A lot that is like, I have to get the iron out of the ground so I can heat it up, so I can make horseshoes, so we can pull the plows, so we can plant the seeds, so we can grow the crops, right? And isn't that really a key part of what we think distinguishes human beings from, say, non-linguistic animals? So, but notice it's still fully functional here, understanding the web of teleological being that constitutes both the human community and the larger environment. Its generality relates it to divine transcendent understanding, right? Because you're understanding generalizations. But for us, that's circumstanced by our contingent human telos. There's controversy about this in the literature because Aristotle says that understanding is the reason is something human beings have, non-humans don't, and so that makes it something that's essential to humans. But then it appears that Aristotle, at least quite possibly, looks like he thinks that there are divine beings or a divine being that also have this quality of contemplation. The nit to pick there, if you're a philosopher, is to say, well, then it's not essential to humans, since it's also a feature of these higher divine beings. Okay, again, last sentence on the second bullet point, its generality relates it to divine transcendent understanding, but for us, it's circumstanced by our contingent human telos. Okay, we understand as far as we need to understand it. Last bullet point, Theoria's example of eudaimonia makes us happy because it cultivates this wider and deeper understanding of the process that we inhabit and that we embody. Remember, he is an organismic social theorist, thinks the human community is like a big organism, a functional virtue of a well-fulfilled human, and of course, crucial in a leader. I don't think it's otherworldly, and I want to talk about this just a little bit more on this next slide. Contemplation on the unmoved mover. Time, as we saw in the physics, is relational. So you're arguing about the unmoved mover. The unmoved mover create the world? Is the unmoved mover the ideal state that all in motion in the world is aiming at? I kind of thought about it like that for a long time. I don't think about it like that right now. First bullet point, time, as we learned in the physics, is relational. The physics is a discussion of the continuum. You've got the surface, so you've got the surface, so you've got the place. You've got the place, so you've got the space. You've got the space, so you've got distance, and that's why you've got time. In other words, everything is not an absolute thing that exists in itself, but time and space here are relational things. What exists is the surface, the continuum, everything that exists. So because of that, then, because what time is just an unfolding event of the universe, there is no question of the unmoved mover having some temporal location, either the beginning or the end or any other point. And there is no temporal dimension. Time doesn't exist independently. Okay, so that's, I think, helps. And then the second bullet point, the telos of the cosmos, right, is achieved. I mean, this is it. And again, this gets, I think, to some Asian philosophy as well. The unmoved mover invests matter with the form of a functional cosmos. Okay, that's the thing. It didn't have to be a functional cosmos, but it is. It's like Plato. It didn't have to be a mathematically organized cosmos, but it is. Virtuous activity produces food, clothing, and shelter first. It's kind of, ecosystemic. And it's not coincidental that Aristotle has been a subject of interest from people trying to develop environmental or ecological ethics in the contemporary scene. Contemplation is contemplation of the system that's in place and working right now, the functional system that's delivering satisfactory life to us. Third bullet point, contemplation is the highest form of human eudaimonia because it produces both systematic and universal understandings that only humans can possess among the animals, a virtue of reason, as he says, as we were discussing a moment ago. So So the highest form of human pleasure is having that understanding, but having that understanding, again, is an example of phronesis. It informs one's activities. It is part of one's activities. Last bullet point there, Plato is explicit in the Timaeus that the cosmos is an intentional being. Plato thinks in order for values and morality to exist, it must be that some kind of teleological proof for the existence of God is true, that the whole universe, the idea is you can only be moral if you have good intentions, making good choices. So you have to be sort of an intentional being to be moral, and it's a moral universe, and therefore Plato thinks in the Timaeus that there is a designer who's sort of the embodiment of the universe. Aristotle might think something similar to this. I'm not sure. That the thing that's interesting there from sort of a metaphysical point of view is, matter is not going to be the basis of thought. Matter is not where the movement that we call thought comes from. So the movement that we call thought comes from something else, and whatever else that might be, Plato's transcendental forms or Aristotle's forms in the context of substance. Either way, it looks like then, well, by default, then that's the part of being that's implicated in thinking. So that certainly at least opens up the possibility that all of being, maybe it's panpsychic or something like that. I don't know. Okay, again, just to sum up here, the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle uses a productive system, right? That is, he says we can go identify virtues this way. We can go find them to catalog an indefinitely large number, potentially indefinitely large number of virtues. Virtues are behavioral traits that function, just as physical traits function. Again, there isn't really a metaphysical difference there. They're both aspects of biology to contribute to the fulfillment and flourishing of the whole organism, what they are. As functional traits, second bullet point, virtues are means between dysfunctional extremes, as courage is the mean between rashness and cowardice. People can be trained through exercise and practice to cultivate the virtues. Aristotle's four cardinal virtues are prudence, justice, courage, and temperance. They're in the classical literature, there's and on into the Middle Ages, there's this endless cataloging of the cardinal virtues, lists of 7, lists of 9. And so on. In the Nicomachean Ethics, there are 18 distinct virtues discussed in all, each with their pair of dysfunctional extremes. And some of them obscure enough that the language is neologistic, if you want to talk about it, make up new words. Last bullet point, it's an organismic biological theory of human nature. It's naturalistic that way as can be, but it's not a reductive materialist one. Again, because it insists that it's the functional explanation or the functional description, definition that tells us what it is that we're looking at in the natural world, and not the physical description. Okay, so yeah, again, just going briskly through there. What to take away in general is this very, sort of naturalistic sense that you're studying organisms. Really, I think one of the best things about Aristotle is when it comes to talking about the philosophy of mind and psychology, he really just thinks that he's talking about life, that he's talking about living organisms, and these are aspects of being alive. And I think with Cartesian dualism and the whole subsequent, sort of Kantian tradition, you really got an alienation of that idea, that too much of a division between the notion of mind and the notion of life. For Aristotle, mind and life are synonymous. Mind really collapses into life. And I think that's true in Wittgenstein too. I think people like Martha Nussbaum are right when they point it out. Quite so. So all right, thank you for listening. That's my take on Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. And I hope you join me for some more of these videos. Thank you very much for watching.